I can't believe it's already 2026, but I still need to wrap up December for 2025. I read 7 books. I didn't finish all 7. I finished 5 out of 7, but I read a lot in December. So I want to go through what I read, what I'm carrying over into the new year, so that we can kind of catch up on where I'm at with my reading, wrap up 2025 once and for all, and be fully in the new year. Welcome back to the channel. Thanks for being here. It's been a little over a month since my last update, so I just wanted to go through what I read in December. I know we're already in the new year. I want to move forward, but you can't move forward until you have processed what has come before. I don't know if that's true, but it sounded wise. So I just wanted to go through the books that I've been reading, mainly because I'm still reading a couple of these, and I made a lot of really good progress in December. I'm excited to finish the year strong. I had an overall reading goal for 2025 of 50 books, and I came in, I think, at 45. So I was below my reading goal. I had 2 different slumps in the year. Just a lot was going on last year. That being said, I managed to catch up a little bit in December and knock out a few more books before we turned the clock back to January 1st. So let's go through. I think this is roughly in order of how I read them throughout the month, starting with Kingdoms of Death by Christopher Rocchio, the 4th book in the Sun Eater series. So I actually started my Sun Eater journey back in 2019. I picked up a mass market paperback of Empire of Silence. I read the first 30% of it, and I liked it. I was really blown away by the prose, but I just, for whatever reason, I didn't finish it. Nothing against the book. I just didn't finish it. And then years later, it blew up in popularity, and I was like, I need to get back to that. So this past year, I read Howling Dark. That's the book that really sold me. By the end of Howling Dark, I was on board. Demon in White, I've already talked about that on this channel, is one of my favorites. Kingdoms of Death, I now have a review up for as well. This was brutal and intense and dark. This is very much like the Dark Night of the Soul for Hadrian, or one of them. There's a lot of dark moments in Sun Eater the further you get along. But this book was like a ride of utter darkness. I don't want to say too much because it's spoilers, it's book 4 in the series. I think if you finish Demon in White, you should know whether or not you want to continue. And if you like it, Sun Eater at all, you should continue it. There's no real question in my mind. And this was kind of further lived up to what the series is meant to be. And I'm excited to finish out this series early this year. I'm in book 6 now, Disquiet Gods. So I've made a lot of progress on Sun Eater, but this was rough. In a good way, it was rough. The next book I finished in December is Kim Jiyoung, born 1982. This is a pretty short novel. It's literary. It's also translated. The original book is by Cho Nam-ju, and it was in Korean, and then it was translated by Jamie Chang. And I thought this was a really interesting novel. It's about this woman who all of a sudden starts speaking in the voices of all these other women, and her husband doesn't know what's going on. He's worried and concerned. And then it starts doing these flashbacks of a few different points in Kim Ji-young's life, when she was a child, when she was in school as a teenager, her early adulthood, and then into her marriage with her husband. And then we kind of follow these stories of what Kim Ji-young faced, mainly in terms of misogyny in South Korean culture. So that's ultimately what this book is about, is misogyny, very specifically the type of misogyny that seems very prevalent in South Korea throughout the 90s, 80s, 90s, into the 2000s. But I mean, I think this will speak to a lot of people, a lot of women outside of South Korea. It's not like misogyny only happens there, obviously. So it's very interesting for that reason. And I think this highlights a lot of the really frustrating and gross and painful things that women have to face because of misogyny. Things that make their lives harder, that set them at a disadvantage, that put certain expectations of society on them from their families and their spouses and just from society at large, and how much weight that really is. And so we kind of see that with Kim Ji-young sort of starting to crack in a way, but this is kind of cracking with a feminine rage. And so all of a sudden, all these voices of all these women, some dead, some not, are kind of speaking through her. So ultimately, I thought this was really interesting. I was kind of hoping for a little more with the speaking from different women aspect. I'm a fantasy and horror reader, so I was kind of hoping it would go a little more off the rails with like weirdness with that. That was mostly just used as a literary device, I think, and very thematic. But it's not a very long book. So it was good. I absolutely recommend it, especially because it's so short. I think you'll get a lot out of it. And I think this was incredibly well written, and I'm glad I read it. Yeah, I'm just, as a fantasy and horror reader, I was kind of hoping she could like control the ghosts of women and like hunt down her enemies or something. That's not the type of book this is. This was good. Next up, I finished Klara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. I think I need to make a review of this for the channel still. I'll put that up soon. This is a beautiful book. I loved Klara and the Sun. Now, obviously, Kazuo Ishiguro is an incredibly well-known author. He won the Nobel Prize for one, I forget which book. He won the Nobel Prize for one of his books. And, you know, I think the hype is warranted. I read Never Let Me Go a year or two ago, and it was really good. I liked it a lot. I liked this one better. This is about an artificial friend, an AF, named Klara. And an AF in this world is kind of like an android robot AI being that you can purchase to be a companion. People often in this world, wealthier people tend to purchase them like for their children. So you'll have this little robotic companion for your child that can be their friend and can help them with their studies and can help clean around the house and stuff like that. But what is really unique about this book is the perspective. This follows, you're fully in Klara's mind through the whole book. And because of that, we get a perspective that's outside of humanity, but also there's kind of a budding humanity within Klara herself. And so this plays with that trope of like, you know, when does consciousness and intelligence become humanity? Like, at what point is it the same thing as a human, even if it's not exactly the same thing? And those lines blur, and they do in this too. And, you know, as you're in Klara's head, you see how smart and intelligent she is. You see that she kind of has her own hopes and dreams and wishes. But at the same time, what I like about this is she's very much limited by her programming and the parameters of what an artificial friend is supposed to be. And so because of that, she's not really fully human. It's kind of debatable. Like, she's not, or at least she's not the same as humans. And that makes it interesting. But I also think because of that, she's always looking at humans with this curiosity and this observation of trying to understand why we do the things we do. And I think as people, we sometimes are so carried along by our own unconscious fears and insecurities and our own emotions that we often miss what's really happening with ourselves and our loved ones. And this captures the type of miscommunications that happen all the time for humans, where someone says something, but they mean something else, or they said something because of how they feel, but they don't even realize what they're doing. They don't even realize how their emotion is charging something they're doing or saying. And Klara picks up on these seeming contradictions because humans are very contradictory creatures. And I just loved that analysis. And Klara was such an endearing character, and so were some of the other characters that she interfaces with in this book. The other thing I'll say real quick is that I loved the world building. Kazuo Ishiguro has a very subtle way of world building. He doesn't tell you a lot of stuff straight out. Often you have to read between the lines and listen to what's not said, or listen to like a passing conversation from other characters and try and pick up from the context of what they're saying. And I love that kind of world building because it makes you feel smart, but also because it feels more realistic a lot of times. Like, yeah, I'm a fantasy reader, and so I'm okay with info dumps to an extent. Like, I read these books where we kind of need to know how the magic's working and the factions and whatever. But sometimes it's really nice when an author is like, I'm just not going to explain most of this, and you're going to pick up what you pick up. And that's very much how this is. Not that this is a hard read. Like, this book is not really about the world building. It's just that it's subtly there in the background. And I really love that. Ultimately, this gave me so many emotions. Again, look for a review soon if it's not up already. But this has cemented Ishiguro as maybe one of my up-and-coming favorite authors, and I will absolutely be reading another book by him in the next month or so. I'm debating between The Remains of the Day, The Buried Giant, and I guess the rest of his catalog. I don't know which one I'm going to pick yet. What's the other one? Pale View of Hills. Those three I've heard tons of good things about, so probably one of those three. Next up, Ashes of Man, book 5 in the Sun Eater series. I had a very Sun Eater heavy December. This was awesome. So this is kind of an immediate continuation after Kingdoms of Death. What's interesting about the Sun Eater books is often there are time jumps. And so no real spoilers here, but like some of the world building is that some of the elite upper class, the nobility, are much longer lived than non-nobility people because of like gene editing and stuff like that. And so Hadrian Marlowe, the protagonist, he will live for hundreds, if not like 1,000 years, is kind of roughly the time frame that a Palatine can live. And so because of that, sometimes in this story, we are jumping decades or even like 70, 80 years between a book. And that's not like that much time in the grand scheme of things. It's a bit of a time jump, but it's also just kind of wild conceptually. But I don't think there's any time jump between, or it's very, very minimal between Kingdoms of Death and Ashes of Man. And I've heard that this was originally written as one book, Kingdoms of Death and Ashes of Man together. Supposedly, this was a single book when Rocchio first wrote it. The publisher said it was too long and he had to split it. I don't know that 100% for sure, but that's what I've heard. I've heard on good authority that I think that's what happened. And if that's the case, I think Rocchio did an incredible job of making these two distinct novels with arcs and that feel like fully formed. Like that, neither of these feel like half a book. Because I've read books by other authors where it's split up, like some of the latest Dresden Files books, Battlegrounds and Peace Talks Battleground. That was originally supposed to be one book, and they had Jim Butcher split it, and you could feel it. It felt like each of those felt like half a book. And so it was kind of to the detriment. Reading it back to back is fine, but like reading those individually was not as satisfying. Whereas these I thought were pretty satisfying in and of themselves. Again, I'm not going to go into spoilers because if you're on book 5 of Sun Eater, like you just need to be reading it. I'm not going to talk about who is or isn't in it, like anything like that. I will say though, there is a moment in this book that devastated me even more than Kingdoms of Death. Somehow. Kingdoms of Death was horrifying. But Ashes of Man left me feeling broken and empty inside. And I think that's the intention. However, as broken and empty as I felt, I immediately picked up the next book in the series when I finished it. So, full review of Ashes of Man coming soon as well. All right, now we're on to the books that I started but maybe didn't quite finish in December. Dregs of Empire is a Sun Eater novella. I mean, it's kind of almost a full-length novel. But this novella, I'm not going to say who it follows because, again, I don't want to spoil anything. Like, this is far enough into the series that, like, you might not even want to know, like, who lives, who dies. I don't want to give anything away. But this follows one of kind of the primary secondary characters, one of the prominent secondary characters from the series, who I like a lot. And so it was fun to follow this character's perspective and what they are going through in the events after Ashes of Man. Make sure to read this after Ashes of Man because there are major events in that book that this directly talks about, and you will be spoiled if you get the order wrong. This I actually finished on January 1st. So it basically is a December read, even though I didn't quite finish it. But yeah, this was good. If you love Sun Eater, I think this is worth reading. It's not super long. It's kind of a nice story to fit in between books 5 and 6. Another book that I started and did not quite finish in December, I also finished January 1st, is Titus Groan, the first book in the Gormenghast trilogy. I also read most of this in kind of November, December. And I'm going to make a review on this soon. I need to figure out how to talk about Gormenghast. I included it in my top 10, so go watch that if you want to know where this ranks. But Gormenghast is something else. It is its own beast. It is one of the most interestingly lyrical prose styles I've ever read. Mervyn Peake writes like nobody I've ever experienced. He has this poetic and flowery descriptive language. He was an artist before he was a writer. And you can feel it in the kind of the mental way he approaches constructing a scene is so vivid and imagery forward, but in a very specific way that's hard to describe without reading it. I absolutely loved the way he wrote. And then just the feeling of Gormenghast, which is this giant sprawling city castle. Like this castle is kind of like its own whole city. A lot of the people who live there never even leave. It's that big, it's that old. And we follow various denizens of Gormenghast as there's been a birth in the royal family. So Lord Groan is like the ruler of Gormenghast, and his new son, Titus, was born. And so this book mostly follows other people kind of in the vicinity of the royal family of Gormenghast talking about these momentous events and figuring things out as there is this new arrival in the family. I think Titus becomes more of a prominent character in the subsequent books. But this is really about like these various characters, like a kitchen boy and like the butler and, various like weird, wacky characters in the city. This is a different type of book than a lot of the ones I normally read, but it struck me and I felt like I was living this artistic fever dream And I love when a book becomes such an experience that it like takes you over you. And that's very much how this was. So anyway, watch my top 10 video. I'll make a more dedicated review of this at some point. I haven't decided if I'm going to do one for Titus Groan or wait until I finish the whole trilogy and then maybe just do a whole Gormenghast video. Either way, loved it. And then finally, in December, I also started The Windup Bird Chronicle by Haruki Murakami. I have never read a Murakami book. I have a couple of his books on my shelf because obviously he's a well-known author. A lot of people talk about him. And I've been intrigued by his work for a long time. I really wanted to read 1Q84 because that's one I've had a couple of friends really recommend to me. I've also had some people tell me that that book is not great. So I'm not sure where I'm going to land with that one. My bookstore did not have 1Q84 when I was there, so I picked up The Windup Bird Chronicle. I'm like a quarter of the way into it. I've been meaning to read more. It's just been kind of busy lately. And I don't know how to talk about Murakami either because in some ways it's a really weird book. Like there are some choices he makes, some very uncomfortable subject matters that he talks about very frankly and kind of in a weird way, not like in a I don't know, like there's some weird like sexual content in this book that feels like artsy, but also like I don't fully get it. And sometimes it also just feels a little uncomfortable. And it's like, what are we doing? But there is a mesmerizing quality to Murakami's writing. Like he also is a fever dream of an author. Like reading this book feels like you were reading an elaborate dream where things make sense within the context of the pages, but they also don't make sense. And you'll stop and be like, wait, how does that connect? It's kind of like when you have a dream and you're like, oh, I was talking to my friend who is also my principal, like that type of vibe where things are so amorphous and just weird. That's how these books feel. There's a magical realism element. People don't act the way people do in this book, which normally is something I would say is a negative. But in this, it's so weird, it like kind of works. I don't know, man. I don't know. I don't know how I feel about this. But I will say, when I sit down to read this, it sucks me in and it's like getting lost in this weird dream. And I think there's something special about that, something special to the quality of Murakami's writing. He's clearly very talented, maybe a genius in some ways, but he's also kind of weird and uncomfortable at times. So we'll see how I feel. I'm hoping to finish this in January. And depending on how I feel about this, I don't know how soon I will get to any of his other stuff. But he's an interesting author. That much I can say for sure. All right, so those are the books I read in December. Again, it was a great month. Kind of heading into January, like I said, I'm going to continue Gormenghast on to book 2, which is Gormenghast, I think is the name of book 2. And then I'm hopefully going to finish Windup Bird Chronicle. And then I've also started Disquiet Gods, which is book 6. I'm a couple chapters into book 6 of Sun Eater, and it's amazing. It's so amazing. There's been kind of another time jump in this one, and I don't want to say anything that could spoil anything. I will just say we're in a very interesting place with this book, to the point where I'm really curious how this will set the stage as the penultimate entry in the series. And yeah, I'm probably going to finish this in the next 2 to 3 weeks, and then it will be time for book 7, Shadows Upon Time. And I'm scared. I'm not ready for Sun Eater to end. I love it so much. And I haven't finished a long series in a while. And that's not true. I finished Stormlight last year. But it's one of those feelings. Finishing a long series there's like a unique type of grief that accompanies the finishing of a series. And I can feel that coming with the end of Sun Eater, and I'm not ready for it. But I know it needs to happen. Those are the only planned books I have. There's a lot of other books on my TBR. I have physical copies of various things I need to read. I have audiobooks I need to listen to. So we'll see. I'll probably pick up a couple of other books in January as well. If you want me to read something specific, let me know in the comments. I don't have any polls or anything, but as I start to really get this channel going, like if you want me to be reading certain things to get my opinion on them, keep commenting on it. The more comments I get for specific things will help me prioritize. I don't know if I might try and do like once every quarter, maybe once a month if things really get crazy, but probably once a quarter I'll pick like a book that people from the channel are suggesting and try and get to that. So let me know. Let me know if there's anything you'd like me to read. Otherwise, this is kind of what I have ahead of me. In terms of other wrap-up stuff, I started playing Metroid Prime 4. That's the video game I was playing a little bit over the holidays. That's fun. If you like Metroid at all, it's more Metroid Prime, which is kind of weird because Metroid Prime is from like the 2000s. So I feel a little bit like I'm stepping into a video game experience from my early teen years, but there's a nostalgia to that, which is really fun. So I've gotten a little ways into that. I have not had a ton of time for video games lately. It's tough. Like, I want to play video games and read books and talk about it and make videos. There's not enough time for all the hobbies, and I have other responsibilities, regrettably. So that's kind of it for that. And yeah, nothing on the movie or TV front really right now. I really want to go see Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey. I know that. I don't, that's not out yet, is it? That's coming out soon if it's not out already. That I really want to go see in theaters. I kind of want to see Marty Supreme. I've heard that's really good. And then the new Avatar movie. Those movies are just kind of fun for what they are, so I might try and see that at some point. But yeah, that's about it on the media front. So we'll go ahead and wrap up there. Thanks again for tuning in. Thanks for hanging out and talking about books. As always, it's so fun to have you here. It's fun to go through all the great things that I've been reading. I'm so excited for 2026. I think I have a ton of great books on the horizon, and I'm going to talk about them here. So I would love to have you back. If you want to like, subscribe, do all that stuff, I'll be back. So thanks again. As always, happy reading. I'll see you next time.